My husband thought a first-class ticket to a remote mountain resort was a romantic gesture to help me find myself. In reality, it was an eviction notice so he could propose to his mistress in the comfort of our penthouse. He believed I was 30,000 feet in the air, crying over our marriage. He had no idea I was standing in the hallway, holding the keys to his destruction instead of a boarding pass. My name is Elena Vance. The weak morning light of a Chicago winter filtered through the thick, reinforced glass of our penthouse on the 45th floor, gliding over the polished black marble countertops in the kitchen. I stood leaning against the island, both hands wrapped tightly around a mug of black, unsweetened coffee. I could feel the chill of the stone seeping through the thin silk of my pajamas, a stark contrast to the silent, humming efficiency of the underfloor heating. I heard Gavin's footsteps approaching from the hallway, the confident, measured rhythm of a man who believed he was the master of his entire world. He entered the kitchen with a smile so bright it was blinding, his expensive sandalwood cologne radiating out, aggressive and thick, attempting to smother the scent of the dark roast coffee. He placed a cream-colored envelope on the counter, embossed with the gold leaf logo of Serenity Peaks, an isolated, ultra-exclusive resort deep in the Colorado mountains, a place where cell service was a dirty word. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, his lips brushing my ear as he murmured in that deep, warm baritone that had once made me swoon. Now, it just made my stomach clench with revulsion. "You need a rest." "Elena," Gavin said, his voice dripping with well-rehearsed concern, his thumb stroking my arm in a proprietary way. He explained that 10 days at Serenity Peaks would do wonders for my emotional balance, helping me escape the invisible pressures he insisted I was suffering under. He heavily emphasized the digital detox package, meaning I would be completely cut off from the outside world, all to truly find myself again. I picked up the first-class ticket. My eyes scanned the departure details tomorrow morning, the earliest possible flight, a one-way trip to complete and total isolation. I recognized the meticulous calculation in every detail. He wanted me gone from Chicago precisely on our 5-year wedding anniversary, a coincidence only a fool would believe was unintentional. A small, thin smile touched my lips, a fragile mask hiding the hurricane raging in my chest. "You are so thoughtful, Gavin," I replied, my voice just breathy enough. "I really do need this." A wave of relief washed over his face, so fast that if I had not been watching for it, I would have missed the tension vanishing from his eyes. He kissed my forehead, a cold, dry press of his lips, like a stamp finalizing a piece of cargo being shipped away to make room for new inventory. He turned his back to me to pour a glass of water, and in that moment, I stared at the broad expanse of his shoulders, picturing the invisible dagger of betrayal already lodged deep between them. I thought back to 3 weeks ago, when I had accidentally synced my iCloud with an old iPad he had left discarded in his study. The messages that popped up were not about mergers or property deals. They were graphic, filthy exchanges with a contact saved only as Counselor Mia. I had read every line, every disgusting plan, every promise about kicking the country club wife out so they could make this penthouse their new love nest. The betrayal had not shattered me with tears. It had solidified into something cold, sharp, and precise, severing any remaining emotional tethers of weakness. I had spent the last 20 days meticulously playing the part of a depressed, tired, and overwhelmed wife, perfectly aligning with the narrative he was already spinning to our friends and partners. I had let him believe I was fragile, easily manipulated, and in desperate need of healing in the middle of nowhere. "I will go upstairs and pack right now," I said, my voice light as smoke, my eyes dutifully lowered to hide the Arctic glint within them. I heard the quiet, deliberate sound of his glass meeting the marble counter, an oddly loud noise that echoed in the vast, sterile kitchen, making it feel hollow and empty. He cheerfully told me to pack my most beautiful dresses. In my head, I was already making a different list. itemizing the sharpest legal weapons I would be taking with me tomorrow. In the expansive walk-in closet lined with plush cream velvet, I dragged my large Louis Vuitton suitcase off the shelf. The wheels rumbled against the hardwood floor like distant thunder, a fitting overture for what was to come. I unzipped the case, but I did not pack the silk sundresses or the yoga gear Gavin had so helpfully suggested. Instead, I reached into the back of my safe and pulled out thick, heavy stacks of printed financial dossiers. I threw them into the suitcase with a satisfying thud. Each sheet of paper was a piece of evidence, a cold, hard number, a sharp needle ready to puncture the balloon of lies Gavin had been inflating for the last 2 years. I selected my outfit for the day with military precision. This was not travel wear. It was battle armor. I put on a pair of perfectly tailored black trousers, a charcoal turtleneck that hugged my frame, and a pair of stilettos with a heel sharp enough to serve as a weapon. The shoes would make a threatening clatter against the stone floors of the penthouse when I returned. I concealed this severe silhouette beneath a long, soft beige trench coat, effectively disguising myself as the obedient wife preparing to leave her nest. My hands trembled slightly as I zipped the suitcase shut. It was not out of fear, but from the electric thrill of a hunter who has finally set the trap for the biggest kill of her life. That evening, Gavin was performative in his affection. He cooked dinner, lit jasmine candles, and opened a bottle of expensive red wine, curating a romantic atmosphere that felt so artificial it was nauseating. He raised his glass to toast my healing journey, his eyes sparkling not with love, but with the eager anticipation of finally removing the obstacle standing in his way. I took a sip of the wine. The tannins tasted bitter and dry in my mouth. I smiled at him over the rim of the glass and thought, "Enjoy your last dinner, Gavin." The next morning, a luxury black car arrived to collect me at dawn, just as the fog from Lake Michigan was wrapping around the skyscrapers like giant, silent ghosts. Gavin walked me all the way to the car door. He hugged me tight, but the embrace felt procedural, a gesture of release rather than holding on. He told me to remember to call him when I arrived, but insisted I should not worry about anything, urging me to turn off my phone and just enjoy the silence. His voice was so tender it made my skin crawl. As the car pulled away, I watched the rearview mirror. I saw Gavin standing there waving, the picture of a supportive husband. But the moment the car turned the corner, he dropped the act. He immediately turned his back to the street, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number with frantic speed. I knew exactly who was on the other end. It was Mia, his young mistress and the private secretary at the Shell real estate company he was always bragging about. That image of him turning his back on me seared itself into my mind, becoming the fuel that would ignite the inferno I was about to unleash. On the way to O'Hare International Airport, I put on my headphones. I was not listening to music. I opened the app on my phone that connected to the surveillance bugs I had secretly installed throughout our smart home system. Static hissed in my ears for a second before Gavin's voice came through, crystal clear and triumphant. He told her that I was gone and urged her to come over immediately, gloating that the entire house was theirs for the next 10 days. I heard a woman giggle on the other end of the line, a sound that made me grip the leather armrest of the car until my knuckles turned white. I did not go to the domestic terminal as planned. When the car reached the kiss-and-fly drop-off zone, I asked the driver to pull over and wait. I did not step out. I did not reach for my luggage. I simply sat in the silence of the idling car, counting the rapid, thundering beats of my heart in my chest. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Sarah, my personal attorney. It was short and cold. I told her to start the process because I was coming back. I ordered the driver to turn around. The car merged back into the heavy morning traffic flowing toward the city center. Carrying a woman who had completely shed her skin of meekness, my gaze out the window was no longer unfocused or teary. It was as sharp as a razor, reflecting the cold steel and glass of the passing skyline. I was not going to find peace in the mountains. I was returning home to bring the storm. On the drive back to downtown Chicago, I opened the secure file on my iPad. I skimmed the pages of the prenuptial agreement Gavin had so lazily signed 5 years ago. He had been drowning in arrogance, so sure of his ability to charm and manipulate. He saw me as nothing more than a foolish heiress, a pretty face for charity events who knew nothing of the world. He never imagined that Clause 14, the infidelity clause, had been drafted by my family's most ruthless lawyer. It was brutally specific, granting me the right to seize all shared assets and revert all financial control to me upon proof of infidelity within the primary residence. Memories flooded back, sharp and unwanted, like watching a slow-motion film of my own destruction. I saw the night I met Gavin at a charity auction, his disarming, manufactured humility, the way he charmed not just me, but my entire family. I remembered how he had slowly, methodically, isolated me from my friends, always under the guise of protecting me. I remembered him offering to help manage my family's investment firm, a request I had granted, blind and stupid with love. He had reduced me to a decorative doll in a glass cage. The shame of my past naivety burned hot, but it was a useful fire, forging my spine into steel. It was the engine of my resolve to utterly dismantle him. My phone vibrated on my lap. It was a secure message from Sarah. Attached was a short video clip, time-stamped just minutes ago, extracted from the private security camera we had installed in the residential hallway, separate from the building's main system. I watched it. A blonde woman in a vibrant blood-red dress stepped confidently out of the elevator. In her hand, she swung a Hermes bag, a limited edition piece I recognized instantly. It was the one I had reported missing from my closet 2 months ago. The anger didn't make my vision go red. It made everything incredibly clear, cold, and sharp. I picked up the phone and dialed the head of building security. His salary, like that of most of the staff, was paid not by Gavin, but by my family's trust. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice low and authoritative, a tone I rarely used but knew how to wield. I am returning to the building. You will not inform Mr. Thorne of my presence. You will ensure the service elevator is locked down immediately. I want no other way out of that apartment. There was no hesitation on his end. Just a simple, understood, Ms. Vance. The Chicago skyline blurred past the window, the bustling streets, the glittering storefronts of the magnificent mile. It was all just background noise, a distant world that had no bearing on the singular, sharp focus of my objective. I reached into my purse and checked the small, professional-grade audio recorder. The battery was full. The memory was empty. I needed every word, every lie, every breathless promise of their tryst captured and preserved. The driver stopped at the coffee shop across the street from my building, just as I had instructed. I didn't get out immediately. I sat in the back of the car, watching my home. From this distance, the penthouse looked quiet, but I could see the heavy velvet curtains had been drawn closed against the bright morning light, a clear, undeniable sign of sordid secrets. I pictured them in there, laughing at my gullibility, drinking my wine, touching my things, tainting my space. Another text from Sarah lit up the screen. Restraining order and divorce papers are drafted and ready to file. Awaiting your signal. I took a long, deep breath, the cool mint from the car's air conditioning calming my pulse. I texted back, 30 minutes. Be ready to freeze the accounts on my signal. I stepped out of the car. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was brutal, a sharp slap to the face that whipped my long, dark hair across my eyes. I pushed it back, adjusted the collar of my trench coat, and lifted my chin. I began to walk, my steps deliberate and unwavering, toward the massive steel and glass structure known as Victory Tower. The irony of the name was almost comical. Today, Victory would belong to one person, and it certainly wasn't going to be Gavin. The lobby of the building was deserted. My stilettos struck the marble floor with a sharp, rhythmic cadence that sounded less like footsteps and more like the countdown of a delayed fuse bomb waiting to detonate. The building manager met me near the desk. He nodded with a mixture of deep respect and apprehension before handing me the mechanical backup key I had requested. It was the only tool that could disengage the lock without triggering the cheerful electronic chime that would alert the occupants inside. Inside the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the brushed steel walls. The woman staring back had eyes like flint and lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. There was no trace left of the patient, suffering wife I had played for weeks. I watched the digital floor numbers climb, 20, 30, 40. With every ascending digit, my heart beat a little harder against my ribs. It was not fear. It was the pure, unadulterated rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I felt less like a spouse returning home and more like an operative infiltrating a hostile compound. The elevator arrived at the 45th floor with a soft chime that felt deafening in the absolute silence. I stepped out onto the thick, plush carpeting of the corridor, which instantly swallowed the sound of my footsteps, turning me into a ghost gliding toward the kill. I approached the massive mahogany double doors. Behind that wood was my life, currently being desecrated. I pressed my ear against the door, but the acoustic insulation of the penthouse was flawless. I could hear nothing but the faint whistle of the wind outside the hallway windows. I took the metal key and inserted it into the lock. I turned it slowly, painfully slowly, millimeter by millimeter, holding my breath to ensure there was no metallic scrape or click. Finally, a tiny, dry snap resonated through the handle. The final barrier was down. I pushed the door open just a crack. A wave of warm air hit my face, carrying a heavy, cloying scent. It was the smell of my expensive jasmine candles, the ones I saved for special anniversaries, mingled with the sickly sweet stench of cheap drugstore perfume. I stepped into the foyer and immediately slipped off my heels, leaving them by the door so I could move across the floor in complete silence on bare feet. The apartment was dim. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight against the midday sun, leaving only the glow of amber mood lighting to create a scene of gruesome romance. From the living room, the smooth notes of Frank Sinatra singing "Fly Me to the Moon" drifted through the air. Gavin had once sworn on his mother's grave that this was our song, the anthem of our destiny. Now, it was merely the background score for the most blatant act of betrayal imaginable. I pressed myself against the wood-paneled wall of the hallway, inching forward until the living room was just around the corner. The shadows concealed my slender frame perfectly. I heard the crystal chime of glasses toasting. Then came a voice, high-pitched and giggling. It was Mia. She asked if he was sure the witch was really gone. Gavin's reply followed instantly, dripping with arrogance and disdain. He told her I was far away by now, probably crying my eyes out on the plane. Missing him. Every word was like gasoline thrown onto the cold, hard flame burning in my gut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I switched the camera to video mode and selected the highest resolution. My hand was rock steady. I needed the perfect angle. I needed irrefutable proof. A recording so clear that no judge in Chicago would need to ask a single follow-up question. I took one last deep breath, filling my lungs with the tainted air of my own home, and prepared to step out of the darkness. From the shadowed concealment behind a large, leafy, fiddle-leaf fig tree, my phone lens captured every pixel of the grotesque tableau before me. Mia was sprawled across my cream-colored Italian leather sofa, the one I had waited 6 months to have imported from Milan. Her bare feet were propped carelessly on the delicate surface of the coffee table. She was swirling a glass of my best vintage red wine, wearing nothing but one of Gavin's crisp white dress shirts, unbuttoned low enough to reveal a flash of aggressive, bright red lace lingerie. It was a flagrant, deliberate desecration of my sanctuary. Gavin stood by the fireplace, framing himself like the lord of the manor. He held a small, dark blue velvet box in his hand. His expression went beyond simple infatuation. It was the smug, preening triumph of a con artist who believes he has just pulled off the heist of the century. He looked down at Mia with a gaze of sick adoration. He told her that she deserved to be the lady of this house 100 times more than I did. He sneered as he said my name, calling me nothing more than a walking ATM machine that had finally outlived its usefulness. Mia pouted, tracing invisible circles on the rim of her wine glass. She asked him in a whiny, petulant voice when he was going to get rid of me for good. Gavin chuckled and took a step toward the sofa. He assured her it would be soon. He revealed that after this trip, he intended to file for legal guardianship. He explained that he had secretly paid off Dr. Robert to falsify a medical history diagnosing me with severe, incapacitating depression and psychosis. He planned to have me committed to a sanitarium upon my return. Once I was locked away, he explained, full control of the family trust would legally transfer to him as my conservator. My blood ran cold, effectively freezing in my veins. This was no longer just a story about a cheating husband. This was a criminal conspiracy to strip me of my freedom and sanity. He did not just want to leave me, he wanted to erase me. The cruelty of it was so vast, so calculated, that it took my breath away. I gripped my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to rush out and strangle him right then and there. Gavin dropped to one knee in front of Mia and cracked open the velvet box. Inside sat a massive diamond ring, catching the amber light of the room. I squinted at the screen and felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in my throat. It was not a new ring. It was my grandmother's heirloom engagement ring, a piece I kept in the wall safe and had believed was simply misplaced. He had not even spent a dime on her. He had stolen my family legacy to propose to his mistress. He asked Mia to be his wife. He promised her that once the dust settled, they would sell the penthouse and move to Paris, building a new life on the pile of bones he intended to make of mine. Mia let out a squeal of delight. In her excitement, she tossed the wine glass onto the table, but it tipped over, sending a dark, blood-like stain spreading rapidly across my antique Persian rug. She ignored it completely, launching herself at Gavin and wrapping her arms around his neck, kissing him with a hunger that looked desperate and cheap. The scene was pathetic, like a third-rate soap opera performed on $1 million stage. Bile rose in my throat, but I forced it down. I had what I needed. The video proved the conspiracy to commit fraud, the theft of the ring, the falsification of medical records, and the adultery. It was time to drop the curtain. I stopped the recording. My thumb hovered over the screen as I uploaded the file to the secure cloud and simultaneously sent a copy to Sarah. A sharp, digital ping rang out from my phone as the message was delivered. In the heavy silence of the apartment, the sound cracked like a pistol shot. Gavin and Mia froze instantly. They broke their embrace and looked around wildly, eyes wide with confusion, searching for the source of the noise that had just signaled the end of their world. I stepped out from the darkness. I did not scream. I did not rush in to claw at her face. I simply emerged, moving with a slow, regal deliberation, as if I were a queen entering her court to find it overrun by vermin. I stopped in the center of the room and folded my arms across my chest. My eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the two animals frozen in their vulgar display. Quite the scene, I said. My voice was perfectly level, almost bored, and that terrifying calm sliced through the jazz music, plunging the room into silence. Gavin jerked back as if he had been tasered. He stumbled, catching his foot on the edge of the sofa, and the blue velvet box flew from his hand. The ring, my grandmother's ring, was flung free. It landed on the hardwood floor, bounced with a series of bright, mocking tinks, and rolled across the room, coming to a perfect clinical stop directly at the toe of my bare foot. Gavin's face was a mask of waxy, bloodless horror. His mouth hung open, and he choked out a series of clicking sounds before he could form a word. Elena. You are supposed to be on the plane." Mia let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek. She scrambled to grab a decorative throw pillow, clutching it to her chest to cover her exposed body. Her eyes, wide with a panic that was almost comical, darted toward me. The witch she had been mocking moments ago was now standing before her, very real and very much in control. The smug, triumphant atmosphere of their tryst evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension that felt heavy enough to choke on. "It seems the flight doesn't accept fools. So I came back," I replied. I bent down slowly, gracefully, and plucked the ring from the floor. I held it up to the amber light, rotating it between my thumb and forefinger, examining the diamond as if it were a cheap trinket from a gumball machine. "And I see you have found a new, creative use for my grandmother's jewelry. Very resourceful. Gavin." Gavin's eyes darted around the room, his reptilian brain working furiously to find a lie, any lie, that would stick. He tried to force a smile, a grotesque grimace that pulled at his pale lips. He took a single step toward me, holding his hands out in a gesture of placation, as if I were a spooked horse. "Elena, baby, listen. This is not what it looks like. This is a complete misunderstanding. She's a model." Okay, she was just trying on the jewelry for a new project. I was simply rehearsing. I cut him off. My voice was not loud, but it was as sharp as a scalpel, and it silenced him instantly. Rehearsing a proposal. With the ring you stole from my personal safe, and I suppose the detailed plan to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric ward was also just part of the script. An absolute, crushing silence descended on the penthouse. Gavin froze mid-step. The denial, the excuses, the oily charm, it all died on his face. He stared at me, his expression crumbling from panic into a look of pure, abject horror. He finally understood. I had not just walked in on the proposal. I had heard everything. Mia, sensing the shift in power, immediately defaulted to the only weapon a woman like her possesses. She burst into loud, theatrical sobs, burying her face in the pillow as her shoulders heaved. Thick, black tears began to cut tracks through her heavy makeup. I didn't know she wailed, her voice muffled. "He told me you two were separated. He told me you agreed." I did not even honor her with a glance. My gaze remained locked on my husband. "Be quiet," I said, the command flat and final. "You knew exactly who I was, and you were so desperate to take my place that you willingly wore my husband's shirt in my home. Do not make me any more nauseated than I already am." I walked to the coffee table, past the spilled wine already staining the rug. I picked up the other glass, the one Mia had been drinking from, still half full. I looked at the dark red liquid, then at the expanse of pristine, white Persian carpet. Without a word, I turned the glass over and emptied its contents onto the floor. The wine spread like a fresh wound. "This stain," I said, my voice devoid of all heat, "is just like the two of you. Disgusting, and very hard to remove, but not impossible to cut out." This was not a negotiation. It was a sentence. The war had officially begun. When Gavin realized that his clumsy, desperate lies were useless, his entire demeanor shifted, the pathetic, pleading mask dissolved, and the true face of the narcissist emerged. His fear curdled instantly into a hot, defensive rage. His spine straightened, his face flushed a dark, mottled red, and he lunged forward, jabbing a finger at my face. "You set me up," he bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. "You staged this whole healing trip just so you could spy on me. You are sick. Elena, do you hear me? Sick your constant control, your coldness. This is what you get. You drove me to this." He was fully untethered now, pacing the room and spewing a torrent of accusations. It was a well-rehearsed speech. I realized, one he had probably been practicing in his head for months. I was too cold. I was emotionally unavailable. I didn't know how to be a real wife. I was obsessed with my family's money and status and looked down on him. He painted himself as the victim of a loveless, frigid marriage, and Mia, who was now shivering by the sofa, trying to hold the pillow in place, was his salvation. His one true salvation. His voice echoed off the marble and glass, a pathetic, desperate attempt to rewrite the reality of the situation, but it only exposed the hollow, grasping void at his core. I stood perfectly still, an island of calm in the storm of his tantrum. I let his words, each one a calculated barb, hit me and fall harmlessly to the floor. I did not interrupt. I let him perform, let him empty his arsenal of blame. I was acutely aware of the small, high-fidelity microphone on my phone, still actively recording every word from the pocket of my trench coat. Every shout, every lie was just another nail he was hammering into his own legal coffin. When he finally paused, panting, his chest heaving with manufactured indignation, I tilted my head. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his bluster like a surgeon's blade. "You say I'm controlling? Is that what you call it when I review the credit card statements and see you've spent over $50,000 a month, every month, on my supplemental card? You say I'm cold. Was I cold when I quietly paid off your brother's six-figure gambling debt last year, without a word, to save your family from embarrassment? No, Gavin, you are not a victim. You are an ungrateful, parasitic child." Mia, who had now managed to snag a silk throw blanket from a nearby chair to wrap around her waist like a makeshift sarong, whimpered from the sofa. "Gavin, just stop," she pleaded. "Let us just go." But Gavin was too far gone, his ego too bruised to accept defeat. He violently shook his head, brushing her off. Go where he sneered, not at her, but at me. "She thinks she's won." He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You're just a rich girl. You're nothing without the men who run things for you. That company, your precious family legacy, would have crumbled into dust years ago if I hadn't been running it. You need me, Elena. You can't do a single thing without me." This was it, the final pathetic lie. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound of pure, undiluted pity. I walked past him, my bare feet silent on the floor, and stopped at the fireplace. The only item left on the mantel was our wedding photo, him in his tuxedo, me in my gown, both of us smiling a lie for the camera. I picked up the heavy silver frame. "You really believe your own delusions, don't you?" I murmured. "You think you're a CEO. You think you ran anything." I turned to face him, holding the photo. "Gavin, you were a figurehead, a legal representative on a letterhead, a warm body to send to dinners I didn't want to attend." I watched his face as the words began to sink in. Every major strategic decision, every profitable investment, every single move that has made this company double its value in the last 2 years was approved by me. From an anonymous email address signed E.V. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sick, gray pallor. His eyes, which had been blazing with rage, now looked hollow, vacant. The realization hit him, the pride he took in his innate business savvy, the one thing he clung to as his own, was a complete fabrication. I had let him play in his sandbox, all while I built the empire. The destruction of his male ego, right here, in front of his mistress, was a far more devastating blow than simply being caught for cheating. "That is not possible," he stammered, his voice a weak, thready whisper. He backed away, physically recoiling as if I had struck him, and bumped into the side of a table. "You are lying." I looked at the smiling couple in the frame, then at the fire. "I never lie, Gavin," I said, my voice calm and final. I tossed the frame into the flames. The glass front shattered instantly with a sharp crack, and the fire greedily licked at the edges of the photograph, blistering our faces. You just were never smart enough to ask the truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the phone that was still recording, and tapped Sarah's name on the screen. I put the call on speakerphone. It rang once. Execute, I said. Sarah's voice came through, crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion, like a news anchor announcing a death sentence. Affirmed, she said. As of this moment, all joint bank accounts are frozen. All credit cards held by Mr. Thorne have been canceled. His access to all company servers, email, and proprietary accounts has been permanently revoked. And per your request, building security and a police detail are on their way up to the penthouse to enforce the immediate restraining order. The words were still hanging in the air when Gavin's phone, silent until this moment, began to vibrate violently in his trousers pocket, a frantic, buzzing sound, like a trapped insect. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He stared at the screen, and I watched as the last traces of his defiant rage were replaced by a new, colder terror. The screen was lit up with a rapid-fire succession of alerts from his bank. Transaction declined, account locked, credit card invalid. He stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger, trying to open his banking app. It simply flashed a bright red error message. Access denied. What did you do? He whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Then, the realization hit him, and he screamed. What did you do? You can't do that. That's my money, my salary, my bonuses. I almost smiled. I shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. Your salary, your bonuses. Gavin, according to Clause 14 of our prenuptial agreement, any and all income generated from capital, meaning my capital reverts solely to me in the event of a contractual breach of fidelity, which you have so spectacularly provided. You signed it. You just didn't bother to read it. You were too busy telling me. I mocked. That money didn't matter. Only our love. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mia. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Gavin, but not with sympathy. She was looking at him as if he were a leper, the man she had pinned her future on the Paris apartments, the dinners. The bags had just evaporated before her eyes, revealing a broke, pathetic shell. She began to edge away from him, a slow, calculated shuffle toward the door, as if his sudden poverty was a contagious disease she might catch. Gavin, in his desperation, turned to her, his eyes pleading for an ally. He found none. Her gaze was as cold and hard as the diamond on the floor. Oh, and one more thing. I continued, my voice light, almost conversational, savoring every word. That new Porsche you're so proud of. The one in the private garage spot, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, which I promptly extinguished. It's leased by the company, and the company, which, as you'll recall, I own, just terminated your employment 5 minutes ago, so you'll need to find your own way out. You could walk, I suppose, or you could call an Uber. I paused, tapping my chin. Oh, wait, you can't. You have no money, you have no credit cards, you have nothing. That was the final blow. The reality of his absolute total ruin slammed into him. Gavin's entire body seemed to collapse in on itself. His legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor, landing on his knees on the wine-stained rug. He wasn't proposing now. He was begging. Elena, please. He sobbed, the sound wet and disgusting. He held his hands up, a gesture of surrender. Don't do this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll change. I swear I'll change. She means nothing to me. She seduced me. It was all her. I only love you. Elena, I've only ever loved you. He began to crawl toward me, a pathetic, sniveling creature, his hands reaching for the hem of my pants. This arrogant, powerful man was reduced to a groveling worm. I felt a wave of pity, not for him, but for myself, for the woman who had once been foolish enough to love this hollow, cowardly thing. Suddenly, Mia erupted. "You bastard," she screamed, her voice raw with her own betrayed ambitions. "You told me you loved me with a snarl." She grabbed her designer handbag from the floor, shoved her feet into her shoes, and began frantically gathering the red dress and clothes that were strewn across the sofa. The room, which had been silent moments before, was now a cacophony of his pathetic, weeping pleas, her furious, hysterical curses, and the sound of Sinatra still crooning from the speakers. I stood in the dead center of it all, untouched, the calm eye of the hurricane I had created, and then a loud, authoritative ding-dong echoed through the penthouse. The doorbell. It was not a guest. It was the executioner. The time for games was over. I looked down at Gavin, who was still weeping at my feet, clinging to my leg. My expression was flat, devoid of any emotion except a profound, bone-deep contempt. "Get up, Gavin," I said, my voice quiet but commanding. "Don't let them see you looking like the stray dog you are." The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a force that vibrated through the floorboards. 3 massive security officers clad in black tactical uniforms filled the entryway, creating an imposing wall of muscle and authority. Leading them was Mr. Henderson, the head of building security, a former Marine whose loyalty had belonged to my father and now belonged wholly to me. Flanking the security team were 2 uniformed police officers, their faces set in grim professional lines. In a blink, the romantic, candlelit atmosphere of my penthouse was shattered, transformed instantly into the harsh reality of a law enforcement eviction zone. "Mr. Thorne, Ms. Monroe, you are required to vacate these private premises immediately by order of the owner," Mr. Henderson announced. His voice was deep and resonant, booming through the foyer like a church bell striking a funeral note. He did not reach for a baton or a weapon. He did not have to. His sheer physical presence, a mountain of disciplined aggression, was enough to make Gavin shrink back against the wall. My husband scrambled to his feet, wiping the tears and snot from his face with the back of his hand, desperately trying to salvage some scrap of dignity in front of the other men. "This is my house!" Gavin screamed, though the sound was thin and cracking, lacking any real conviction. "You have no right to be here. Get out!" One of the police officers stepped forward, bypassing Gavin's outburst as if he were a noisy child. He held up a document, a temporary restraining order that Sarah had faxed over only moments ago. "Sir, this deed confirms that this apartment is the sole property of Mrs. Elena Vance. Your name does not appear on the title, the lease, or the deed. You are currently trespassing on private property." The officer's voice was bored but firm. "You can come with us voluntarily, or we will be forced to remove you." I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Mia, who had managed to haphazardly button the shirt and pull on her skirt, was trying to sidle along the wall, attempting to slip past the wall of security guards and escape into the elevator. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a whip. "Ms. Monroe." Mia froze in her tracks. She turned to look at the police, then at Gavin, and finally back at me. "The Hermes bag you are holding," I said, pointing a manicured finger at the purse clutched in her hand. "That belongs to me. Put it down." Her face flushed a deep, violent purple. The humiliation was total. With a shaking hand, she dropped the expensive leather bag onto the floor. It landed with a heavy thud. Without another word, she bolted for the door, squeezing past the officers and running into the hallway like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, not once looking back at the man she claimed to love. Gavin did not get the same chance to run. When he hesitated, still muttering about his rights, the 2 security guards moved in. They grabbed him by his upper arms, their grip like iron clamps. They hoisted him off his feet and began to drag him toward the exit. He twisted his neck around, locking eyes with me one last time. His face was a twisted mask of hatred and desperation. "You will regret this." "Elena," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "You are nothing without me. You cannot live without me." I stood completely still, my expression unreadable, watching as they hauled him into the elevator. The metal doors slid shut, cutting off his scream in mid-air, severing his presence from my life with a finality that felt surgical. The noise died instantly. The penthouse returned to its natural, heavy silence, but the air felt different now. It was thinner, cleaner, easier to breathe. The police and Mr. Henderson nodded to me and departed, leaving me alone in the wreckage. I looked around at the debris of my marriage, the spilled wine staining the rug, the scattered clothes, the diamond ring lying forgotten on the table. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and yanked the heavy velvet cords. The curtains parted, and the bright, harsh light of the midday sun flooded the room, bleaching out the shadows and the lingering smell of deceit. I looked down at the street, 45 stories below. From this height, the people looked like ants. I spotted two particular figures on the sidewalk. Gavin and Mia were standing next to a pile of dumped luggage, arguing violently, their arms waving in the air. Seeing them so small, so insignificant, a wave of relief washed over me. It was quiet, but it was profound. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number for an elite cleaning service. "I need a full crew immediately," I said when the manager answered. "I want everything cleaned. I want the sofa thrown out. I want the rugs removed. I want every sheet and towel replaced. I do not want a single speck of dust from today left in this apartment." I hung up the phone and walked toward the bedroom, where my suitcase, packed with files and evidence, was waiting for me. Even though the invaders were gone, the storm in my chest had not yet passed. I stood in the middle of the violated living room, staring at the empty space where the sofa had been. The victory did not feel like the triumphant, noisy celebration I had imagined. It felt vast, quiet, and profoundly empty. This was the price of the truth. It frees you, yes, but it leaves a wound that needs time and air to heal. I heard the wind whistle past the windows, a high, lonely sound, as if the sky itself was mourning the death of a 5-year marriage. I walked to the wet bar, a monument to Gavin's pretentious entertaining. I found his most expensive bottle of whiskey, the one he reserved only for men he wanted to impress. I did not open it to drink. I carried it out onto the windy balcony. The air from Lake Michigan hit me, cold and sharp, whipping my hair into my eyes. I opened the bottle and, in one fluid motion, I inverted it. I watched the amber liquid pour from the 45th floor, a stream of waste dissolving into the city air far below. It was just like the love I had given him expensive and a complete waste. My phone buzzed. For a half second, my heart seized, thinking it was him, but it was not. It was an email from my actual business partner in Silicon Valley. The subject line was short. "Project Phoenix is live." This was the startup I had been building in secret, funded under my mother's maiden name. It was an educational tech platform that Gavin had once laughed at, calling it my little hobby. His departure was not an ending. It was the starting pistol. It was time for me to step out of the shadows as myself, no longer hiding behind a puppet. I went back inside. The plane ticket to Serenity Peaks was still on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, staring at the destination. Serenity. The very thing he had tried to use to banish me was now the one thing I had truly achieved. But on my own terms. I clicked a lighter and touched the flame to the corner of the ticket. I watched the orange fire lick at the edges, turning the printed lies and first-class accommodations into black, flaky ash that drifted down into the stainless steel sink. I opened my laptop. I went to an airline website. Not Colorado. Not his cliché promise of Paris. I booked a one-way first-class ticket to Tokyo. I had always wanted to go, to study the art of kintsugi, the Japanese craft of repairing broken pottery with seams of gold. The philosophy that an object's breaks and repairs are what make it beautiful, what give it its value, was exactly what I needed. I was not broken. I was a masterpiece in the process of being mended with pure liquid gold. Late afternoon sun, a deep, bloody orange, set the Chicago skyline on fire, turning the glass towers into giant, silent torches. I changed out of the black battle armor and into a soft, ivory-white cashmere dress. I sat in the one armchair the cleaners had left. I closed my eyes and just listened. The silence was absolute. No more fake jazz, no more arrogant footsteps, no more the scent of another woman. There was only the sound of my own heart, beating slowly, steadily, and with absolute pride. Before I left the next morning, I placed my key to the penthouse on the polished marble table. Beside it, I placed the signed divorce papers, my signature a sharp, definitive black line. I did not lock the door on my way out. I left it open for the new interior design team arriving tomorrow. They had instructions to gut the place. This was no longer a mausoleum for a dead marriage. It was about to become the fortress of an independent woman. I pulled my suitcase, now packed with my own belongings for Tokyo, out of the building. No disguises, no performance. No disguises, no performance. I walked onto the street, looked up at the star-filled night sky, and took a deep breath of the cold, free air. A taxi pulled up. The driver looked back. Where to? Lady, I smiled. It was the first real, genuine smile I had in years. The international terminal. I have a new life to start. The car pulled away, leaving Victory Tower and a bankrupt, broken man in the darkness behind me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's connect and share our thoughts. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help more people hear this story.